Man, I remember the days when CrossFit was picked on by everybody. CrossFit was you would be working out in your local gym, and all of a sudden your buddies and everybody finds out you do CrossFit and you're getting picked on. CrossFit was just picked on all the time. And now here we are in 2026, and you can walk into a CrossFit gym and guess what they're picking on now? HYROX. HYROX has blown up. It is extremely popular. It reminds me of the CrossFit craze. And of course, the CrossFitters are hating on HYROX. They're like, oh, we were here doing hybrid stuff before y'all, blah, blah, blah. And so HYROX is, CrossFitters are hating and picking on HYROX. And so HYROX is, has blown up. It has blown up. I actually signed up for HYROX Tampa today, and I had 4 different browsers pulled up, ready to go. And I was 1900th in line on one. I was 18,000th on another, 15,000th on another, 22,000th on another. Yeah, I ended up getting a ticket, not for what the division I wanted to. I wanted to try to go pro, but I got a division for the open and got the charity option. So I get to try to raise some money before the event, which is really, really cool. It's super, super excited about doing it, but it was tough to get a ticket, man. 22,000th in line. This thing is popular. This thing is going crazy, and that's just for Tampa. That's just for Tampa. With all that fame comes all the hate, and people are hating. So in this video, I want to talk about the differences between CrossFit and HYROX. What's the difference between the two? Who would fare better? A HYROX athlete coming to CrossFit or a CrossFit athlete going into HYROX? What is the differences between the two training methodologies? Where do they lie? Because they're both hybrid sports. They're both hybrid training methodologies. Where do they lie on the hybrid spectrum? And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that hybrid spectrum as well, and hopefully generate some questions from you. Hopefully generate some comments from you. Maybe even a little bit of hate or a little bit of controversy. I don't know. We'll see. But let's kick it off and just talk about the differences between CrossFit and HYROX. So HYROX, first of all, is a competition. It's a competition that goes all around the world. It's a standardized competition to where you do the same event every single time. You're going to follow the same competition. And although while the arenas, the venues differ, which make the times differ just a little bit, it's still the same thing every time. You're going to do 1K run. You're going to do the ski erg. You're going to do each station, each HYROX station in the same way every single time. So HYROX is a competition event that's all around the world. CrossFit, however, is many things. CrossFit is many things. And when we talk about CrossFit, I think what we have to do is make sure that we are defining CrossFit correctly. Before we start to engage any of those types of conversations about CrossFit versus anything or what is CrossFit, we need to make sure we know what we're talking about. Because for CrossFit, are we talking about CrossFit as a training methodology in general? Because CrossFit as a training methodology has been around a really long time and is a great hybrid form of fitness. It is hybrid. To me, hybrid and CrossFit are synonymous as far as training methodology goes. They're both the same. They're both training hybrid. You're being prepared and ready for whatever. But people have different definitions of CrossFit. For some folks, CrossFit to them is a CrossFit Metcon. It's like, I'm going to do a workout for Tom of this, and this movement, blah, blah, blah. And they think of like high intensity, varying movements in a workout, a WOD, a Metcon is what people think about when they think of CrossFit. Other times people may refer to CrossFit as the Greg Glassman CrossFit methodology, the way the programming was back then, or if you still go to CrossFit.com today, the way the programming looks. Some people are defining CrossFit as that, while other folks are defining CrossFit. When they talk about CrossFit, they're talking about the sport. They're talking about the competition, the competitive side of CrossFit. So when we talk about CrossFit, we got to make sure that we're really defining what we're talking about, because for some people, if they're just talking about CrossFit as like a general training methodology, really that word could be used interchangeably to hybrid training, in my opinion. So mostly in the video today, I'm going to be talking about CrossFit as a sport. Anytime I venture out of that, I'm going to try to catch myself and explain which kind of definition of CrossFit I'm venturing into. But for the most part, we're talking about CrossFit as a sport. So we defined HYROX, we defined CrossFit. Now let's start by defining where they lie on the hybrid spectrum. So there is in my mind, what I define a hybrid spectrum. We're on one end of the spectrum of hybrid training. You have very, very skill and strength biased programming. Very skill and strength biased programming. This would be your gymnast. This would be your power lifter. This would be your Olympic lifter who identifies mostly with those sports, but maybe trains in some other modalities as well, right? They run, they do some CrossFit Metcons and WODs, they bike, whatever makes them hybrid, they do a little bit of that. But they mostly stick on the end of the high skill or the high strength. On the very opposite end of the hybrid spectrum, you've got your ultramarathoner. This would be your ultramarathoner or your Ironman who not only trains ultras, but they train hybrid. They lift. They intend to lift, but their predominant form, their programming is biased towards ultramarathons, right? That's their thing. So they are hybrid. They lift. They maybe take part in other sports. Maybe they do jiu-jitsu or whatever. They're a hybrid athlete. They're trying to move the needle in all areas. They're just really scaled and really biased towards the endurance side, right? And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, like I said, you've got the skill and strength biased person. So this is the person who, maybe they're a really, really strong lifter, but they run some, So to me, CrossFit is more on that high skill, high strength end of the spectrum. It's kind of over here. While HYROX is kind of over here. It's more towards the endurance end of the spectrum. We got to remember a HYROX event is anywhere from the elites, 50 something minutes to some folks it may take them 2 hours. Now you're getting like half marathon time domains. So HYROX is predominantly an endurance event. While there are some movements that could be considered strength movements in the pro division, I would dare say in the open division, none of the weights would be considered true strength movements. I know that's dependent on the person, right? For some people, they might be heavy, but I'm talking about in a competition setting where you're really testing, like if we look back at that spectrum, the highest end strength athletes, to them, the weights in HYROX, especially in the open division, were going to be extremely light. They're just going to be irrelevant, right? Whereas for them, the running and the ergs are going to be very, very relevant for them. That's going to be obstacle to overcome, but the weights are not. So the weights in HYROX, even in the pro division, are just not super, super relevant. Now, they are obviously to the folks that are biased towards that endurance end of the spectrum, that are very, very biased towards that endurance end. Yes, the weights are relevant to them. They're not relevant to the people that are even high-level CrossFitters and beyond on that end of the spectrum. So when we look at HYROX is more of an endurance event where it lies on that end. There's not much skill in HYROX. Now, don't get me wrong. Don't come at me swinging. Don't hate. In every single sport in general, there's skill. But if you look at HYROX, you're going to be able, if you go into any random gym at any time, I walk into Planet Fitness today, the majority of the people are going to be able to push a sled. Now, maybe not with the weights. They're going to be able to push a sled. They're going to be able to ski. They're going to be able to row. They're going to be able to lunge. Wall ball might take a little bit of practice. Okay. Wall ball definitely. But they're going to be able to do all those movements. And it's not hard to learn those movements. Whereas CrossFit, to get to the elite level of CrossFit, or even an advanced, even a high intermediate level of CrossFit, the skill level is going to be pretty high. It's going to take some time. Unless you're a freak athlete, it's going to take some time to learn the skills. Take some time to learn how to double under, unless you've been jump roping, quite a bit. It's going to take some time to learn the double under. It's going to take some time to learn the handstand push up, handstand walk, ring muscle ups, bar muscle ups, all these things. The Olympic lifts could take a lifetime to master. It's going to take a long time. A squat snatch, things like that. High skill. And in CrossFit, you have to have high level of strength. The CrossFitters, the top CrossFitters, are snatching over 300 pounds, clean and jerking over 350 pounds, squatting up to, around 500 pounds, deadlifting over 500 pounds. They're doing large sets of pull-ups. And I'm not just talking about kipping pull-ups. I'm talking about strict pull-ups as well. They are very strong. They have a lot of muscle endurance, the ability to do something like 100 toes to bar in a very, very short amount of time. These are phenomenal athletes, high strength, high skill. However, while they are enduring in CrossFit until you get to the highest elite level, there's not a lot of endurance up to that point. I'm talking about endurance beyond a 20-minute time domain. You go to all your local CrossFit competitions, you rarely see anything beyond you really rarely see anything beyond like a 15-minute time domain, but especially 30 minutes, getting up into an hour is almost non-existent at a local CrossFit competition. I know logistics don't allow well for it, but CrossFit just does not sit. There's not a lot of true endurance in CrossFit until you get the highest level. Usually at the games, one event at the games each year is a true endurance event. And still yet, it's on a lot of times on the shorter end of the spectrum. It's not, I can't recall getting into like 2-hour ranges or anything like that. Maybe I'm sure I'm missing something for sure. But CrossFit's on that strength end of the spectrum. So, but who would fare better? Would a CrossFit athlete fare better going into HYROX, or a HYROX athlete going into CrossFit? Absolutely, without a doubt, 100%, the advanced and elite CrossFit athlete is going to do better going into HYROX than the HYROX athlete coming into CrossFit. In CrossFit, you're already establishing, especially in elite CrossFitters, does have to establish a pretty big aerobic capacity to go to the games. Not just because the games have that one endurance event, but because the games in themselves are almost an endurance event, because there is so many events over so many days. They have to have amazing work capacity and a strong aerobic capacity as well. So I think that aerobic base and that strength base is going to carry over well into HYROX, to where the weights are never going to be a problem in HYROX. They're going to be good at the wall balls. They're going to be good at the lunges. They're going to be able to adjust and be good at the sled push very quickly. And then all they're going to have to do is develop their run. Now, the run could be difficult for some to get into the elite category. I'm not saying that they would beat the elites in HYROX. Not going to happen. They're not going to beat the elite 15. They're not going to beat. I'm going to go into that a little bit more. So just hang tight. Bear with me. But I do think still CrossFitters are going to fare better going from CrossFit to HYROX than HYROX to CrossFit. Reason being, the high skill, the high strength of CrossFit takes time. It takes a lot of time to build. And humans in general are more capable of building endurance than they are freakish amount of strength. Freakish amount of strength is a lot more genetic. That's not to say, the highest elite level endurance athletes, absolutely freakish genetics. But most humans in general can build endurance easier than they can build strength. So the CrossFit athlete is going to have a better crossover to HYROX. Now, with that being said, is the CrossFit athlete going to be elite in HYROX? No. Now, the Ironman, the 10K runners, probably even half marathon runners, folks that are really, really fast, they're great swimmers. The endurance athletes are having amazing carryover to HYROX and having better carryover to HYROX than the CrossFit athletes. The amount of strength that it takes to build in CrossFit to go to the CrossFit Games takes years and years and years. We've seen this with athletes like Hunter McIntyre, for example. Amazing engine, very strong, very, very strong, but could not make it at the highest level in CrossFit. It just takes years and years to not only build the strength, but like the strength skill for like snatches and squat snatches and clean and jerks. It just takes a long time to build that, and it would take too much. It would take too much time for the HYROXer to build from the level that they are at already. Now, so I think the CrossFitter is going to carry over to HYROX better than HYROX to CrossFit. Now, of course, there are some workouts where the HYROX athlete is going to do phenomenal in CrossFit. I think that a young enough HYROX athlete and a genetically strong enough HYROX athlete, they are already someone who is kind of a freak of nature. They're already pretty strong. You take a HYROX athlete that is one of the strongest athletes out there, maybe they could carry over to CrossFit and young enough as well to be able to develop all the skills and further develop and refine their strength for a sport like CrossFit. Now, let's look at the far ends of the spectrum compared to CrossFit. So compared to CrossFit, I do think that your Ironman competitors, your runners, maybe not marathon runners, a half marathon and some time domains below that, your Spartan racers, of course, high level swimmers, but mostly hybrid endurance athletes are going to have more carryover to HYROX than a CrossFitter. This is where those endurance athletes, when they have that running base is going to carry over so well in the HYROX that as long as they can achieve the prerequisite level of strength for HYROX, which I don't think is very hard to do, the CrossFit level, very, very hard to attain. HYROX level of strength, not very hard to attain. I think the average man can attain the strength level for HYROX fairly, I'm not going to say fairly easily. But that means that the runners, your fast runners have so much carryover to HYROX that I think it's going to be really difficult for the bigger, stronger athletes to catch up, to get as fast as they need to be truly competitive at HYROX. You take somebody like myself, who I'm not by any means an elite CrossFitter, but I did okay back years and years ago, and I've developed a fair amount of strength. 405 by 5 on back squat, 330 clean, 325 clean, 245 snatch. Fair gymnastics numbers, like nothing insane, and still had a pretty decent engine, like 218 Diane time, pretty fast Murph times, Cindy 26 rounds of Cindy, like fairly decent, nothing too crazy. I think at this point it would be really, really difficult. It'd be so hard for me to develop the engine and the running needed to be like super competitive in HYROX when I'm already 38 years old, but I think those guys that have that running pace, like somebody my age that's not as strong as me, but is fast, like they're running 17-minute 5Ks. I think that person is going to have, as long as they got a baseline level of strength, they're going to have more carryover to HYROX than I would. Yeah, so when you look at CrossFit, I mean, the whole CrossFit versus HYROX thing, I think is ridiculous. I think they're two totally different ends of the spectrum. They're totally different ends of the hybrid spectrum, and I think it's really cool for HYROX athletes, and not necessarily the elite HYROX athletes, but like your kind of higher level or everyday HYROX athletes to go and train some CrossFit, to train some powerlifting, to train some Olympic lifting, to train some bodybuilding, and stay hybrid and train in those domains and still do HYROX. And on the same end, I think that the CrossFitter, uh, whether it's the advanced CrossFitter, I'm not talking elites, but the advanced CrossFitter, the everyday CrossFitter, is great for the everyday CrossFitter to do a few HYROX events, to do some longer endurance events, to do some half marathons, maybe even venture into a marathon, or maybe even venture into some kind of ultra event or something like that, to keep themselves truly hybrid and truly challenging themselves on the opposite ends of the spectrum. And I think that's what being hybrid is really all about, doing things that, you know, constantly pursuing things that are challenging, outside of just the falling into that, super, super strength bias programming, or for the ultra marathon runner, falling into that super ultra marathon. I mean, that's what you love. That's cool. But if you're truly trying to be hybrid, I think that that's where it's cool to cross over and use each one of these different competitions and different training styles to complement each other. Because we know, as HYROX is becoming real popular, it's quickly becoming a training methodology. There's HYROX classes, there's lots of HYROX programming that is centered completely around training for HYROX, right? And I think it'd just be cool to really keep it hybrid. Now, I do think in all that, you've got HYROX that is on closer to the endurance end of the spectrum. You've got CrossFit, to me, that is closer to the strength skill end of the hybrid spectrum. I do think there's still room in the middle for an event. There's still room in the middle for an event, and even for training methodologies to kind of center themselves a little bit more and not be so biased to either side. I still think there is room for that. I really do. And I like to see now, with lots and lots of hybrid programming coming out, I hope that a lot of that hybrid programming truly finds themselves in the middle of that, and where people can kind of bolt on and focus on different aspects at different during different seasons and different times, where I'm going to follow this hybrid programming, but for this period of time, I'm going to strength bias, because, oh, maybe I'm going to do a powerlifting meet, or I'm going to bias towards endurance. Maybe I'm going to run a marathon. But I think there's a place for another competition in the middle. It's in the middle of that spectrum, and I don't know of one right now. I don't know of one. I'm sure there's one in the works. I'm sure there's one in the making. If you know about one, please post in the comments. I'd love to talk about that, because I would love to see a competition that centers right there in the middle, where a competition that truly has some strength events, truly has some skill events, but they're not so outlandish like CrossFit. Maybe you're not going to have handstand walking, which I love handstand walking. Okay, I love handstand walking. But maybe you're not going to have handstand walking. Maybe you're not going to have squat snatches. But maybe you are going to have a power clean. Maybe you are going to have a barbell squat, or pull-ups, or some kind of strength, um, or muscle endurance type of movement. Maybe you're going to have a sprint. Maybe you're going to have a max vertical leap. Maybe you're going to have a half marathon to kick off, or to, at some point in the event, right? Um, and I think it could be done. And maybe it's not a half marathon. Maybe it's a 10-miler, 8-miler, or maybe it's a combination. It's like, maybe you have a HYROX type event within that event. You know what I'm saying? So it tests all these different levels of fitness, but it kind of removes some of the high skill from CrossFit, and pulls it back and adds to, and maybe I like the idea of HYROX having it as a standardized test. I love that. So I think maybe you make it a standardized test of these certain things, whatever the tests are. But the tests truly have to test different time domains. We need to test explosiveness. We need to test strength. We need to test Lack power. We need to test, like, you know, different time domains, and also that long endurance as well, which I think a lot of just local events, people like me, are just unable to go into an event and truly test all of that. It's like I show up for an event and it's going to be either or. Either I got to go to an endurance event like HYROX, or I got to go to a CrossFit competition where the longest event is 15 minutes and everything is essentially suits the bigger, stronger, more powerful athlete, which is great. But man, you know, let's test, let's really truly try to form a test for the everyday athlete and the advanced athlete, and not necessarily just for the elite athletes. Like, I think the CrossFit Games is an amazing test, but you know, everybody doesn't get to go to the CrossFit Games and do it for days. What do you think? Is there room for another test like this? Is there already a test that is like this that I don't know about? Any other comments? Anything that I said that maybe is controversial, you disagree with, agree with? Your thoughts on it all? I would love to hear it. And as always, just thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you tuning in, and I hope that you tune into the next one.